Before we get to the Falcons draft rumors, help me out, please. If we can get to 21,000 subscribers this weekend, my boss said we can go live on the channel for the 8th overall pick. And during the NFL draft, studio space is at a premium here at Chat Sports, but it would mean a ton to me if we can go live for pick number 8. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do a man a solid and hit the sub button down below. We've got some pretty juicy draft rumors to get to on today's show, as ESPN put out an excellent article going over all 32 teams' current draft situation, what they're hearing, and what to expect in less than 2 weeks. So let's dive right into it, with the first question being asked is, biggest need for Atlanta after they presumably go edge at pick number 8. And Falcons ESPN beat reporter Michael Rothstein wrote this: cornerback. Specifically, finding a player to line up opposite A.J. Terrell has to be a priority, with Terrell going into a contract year and not yet holding a long-term extension. There's no clear number 2 opposite him. And I don't disagree with what Michael is saying there, especially with Terrell entering a contract year and not getting that extension yet. Definitely raises a few eyebrows about whether or not they think he's a long-term fit at cornerback. But I will add that the Falcons went out and signed 2 cornerbacks in free agency over the last week or so. So that definitely makes me feel a little bit in the camp of maybe Atlanta has looked at the round 2 and round 3 cornerback crop and isn't super impressed with them. So they decided, let's go sign 2 corners right now. If you liked the corners or loved the cornerbacks in round 2, don't you think you might wait till after the draft to sign a Kevin King or an Antonio Hamilton? They're not going anywhere. I could be reading into this too much, but 2 signings at any position right before the draft doesn't make me scream, oh, they're going to go draft that position now with one of their first picks in the draft. Don't you see what I'm saying here? Now, if you look at the stats for the 3 players, I'll say, competing for that CB2 job, it is second-year man Clark Phillips, a 4th-rounder out of Utah last year, NFL vet Antonio Hamilton, and then former first-round pick by the Vikings, Mike Hughes. And all these guys had pretty mid-ish seasons a year ago. Any of them really playing a huge role. Like Hamilton played the most snaps out of the bunch, 550, and that's not even really 50% of defensive snaps. It's right around there. And then they signed Kevin King, who unfortunately just has been injury-riddled his entire NFL career. You can see that towards the end of his time in Green Bay, he wasn't even playing over half a season consistently. So for him, he stepped aside for 2022 to get his body healthy, and then training for 2023, he popped his Achilles. But now he reunites with 2 former coaches in Atlanta, Jerry Gray, the DB coach, and now defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake, who was actually his coach at Washington. So Atlanta has made some moves in free agency at the cornerback position. So I'm not quite sold on CB being a lock for them at pick 43, but I definitely think it's got a chance. Do you think Atlanta should go cornerback in round 2? Yes or no? Simply put, should this be the position group they attack with their second draft pick? Let me know down in the comment section. Now let's react to more of what Michael Rothstein wrote. It rates slightly higher than receiver, where Atlanta added in free agency, but getting a young pass catcher to pair with Drake London should be optimal if Atlanta wants to run 3 wide receiver sets this season. I like how he mentions that the Falcons went out and got a free agent wide receiver, but doesn't mention the 2 cornerbacks they signed. But I do want to unpack that last bit where he talks about the 3 wide receiver sets. And we're going to get in the weeds for a moment here, but stick with me because I'm going to try and get this as simplistic as possible. If you look at teams' 11 personnel usage, 11 personnel means 1 running back, 1 tight end. 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and so on and so forth. So if you have 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, that means you have 3 wide receivers, right? This is a West Coast pass-happy offensive personnel usage. And the Rams, where Atlanta's play caller just came from, an offensive coordinator, ranked first in 11 personnel usage last year. The Vikings, where Kirk Cousins coming from, ranked 13th. And keep in mind, last year, or 2 years ago in Minnesota, when Kirk played the entire 2022 campaign, The Vikings were 4th in 11 personnel. Meanwhile, Atlanta last year, they ranked towards the absolute bottom of the league, 31st, 32nd in the league. So we are seeing that a new Falcons offense, combination of what we saw from the Rams last year, Zach Robinson coming over, and then Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, they use a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So it would be pretty beneficial for them to lean into the type of scheme and personnel groupings they're going to run out there. If you're going to have 3 wide receivers on the field a lot, you should have 3 good wide receivers. Atlanta didn't do that last year, so they didn't need to have 3 good wide receivers. I expect them to do that now. So now you look at the top wide receivers in this draft class, and I don't think any of the top 5 names are going to be there in round 2. Maybe Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell are flip-flopped, but Xavier Legette, Keon Coleman, Malachi Corley, Ladd McConkey, Troy Franklin, Jalen Polk. Like, there are a lot of names that are going to go off the board in round 2 at the wide receiver position. And if Atlanta is committed to leaning into what Zach Robinson did in LA and what Kirk Cousins did in Minnesota with 11 personnel, they should probably add another wide receiver and not settle for Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and Rondale Moore. Now, it's pretty poetic timing that as I film this video, Ladd McConkey is in Flowery Branch having a pre-draft visit with the Falcons. So if I had to pick a position that Atlanta targets at 43, I think it might be wide receiver over cornerback because of what their offensive identity is likely going to look like and how that wide receiver room, it needs a little bit more love if that's what they're going to do compared to the cornerback room, which I definitely think could stand to add another top player in day 2 of the draft, but might not be round 2. Maybe it's one of the 2 third-round picks. Ultimately, though, when you pick at 43, you probably shouldn't predetermine what you're going to do because 42 names are going to go before you. It's very difficult to know who's available and who's not available, right? If Atlanta likes 3 wide receivers a lot and they all go 39, 40, and 41 and 42, like, you're not going to have those options at 43. So it's wait and see mode. And if I had to rank who I want to be available at 43 within reason, because I'm not just going to take a bunch of guys that are going to go round 1 and pray they fall round 2, here are 5 names I like a lot. Drazan Johnny Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. Grady Jarrett coming off a torn ACL, 30 years old. I think Newton is the next Grady Jarrett in this draft class. Kool-Aid McKinstry, really good DB out of Alabama. He's coming off a foot injury, but he should be ready to roll by training camp with no issue at all. And I think he offers you a lot of versatility as well, which Atlanta needs in their secondary, right? Only A.J. Terrell is really stuck in a spot. Ladd McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, the Florida wide receiver, he's got some of the best hands in this draft class. McConkey is a very, Swiss Army knife type player, and I think that would bring a new dimension to the wide receiver room where London's your big body, Mooney's your vertical, and Ladd's kind of in between, effing around in the middle of the field, getting first downs for you. And then if I will include a corner at the end, Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. Physically, he's not one of the most gifted corners in this class, and that's a really tough thing to overcome at that position. But he's got one of the brightest minds in this class across the board, and I just feel like he's a Raheem Morris player through and through. All right, before we get to the rest of today's show, speaking of Kirk Cousins and this Falcons offense, if you want to up your Atlanta wardrobe, go get a brand new Falcons jersey. Kirk Cousins jerseys are available, and Fanatics, I think, is running a 25% off sale. They kind of come and go, so don't wait too long. Go to chatsports.com/Cousins. I put that link in the comments and description of today's video. Click on it and do future you a solid. I'm not a big shopper, but there's nothing better than the high of getting some mail, especially when it's a jersey or something for your favorite team. Moving on to more from Rothstein, he wrote, and even if the Falcons take an edge rusher at number 8, it shouldn't preclude them from adding another later in the draft, considering the issues at the position over the past half decade. So, who's ready for a hot take? I don't think Chop Robinson goes rounds 1 or 2. And I know all the mock drafts have him going rounds 1 or 2. Some think he could even be the second edge rusher taken off the board. So why do I think Chop Robinson could be in play for the Falcons at pick number 3? I was trying to broaden my horizon on Robinson because I've been fairly critical of him as a prospect because of the lack of production at Penn State. And then it kind of hit me. It really reminds me of a very similar draft prospect last year, not identical positions, but a guy who didn't have a ton of production but physically stood out. Adetomiwa Adebawore, out of Northwestern, and he went to the Indianapolis Colts. And you can see that while the two aren't apples to apples, they were both big dudes. Adebawore a little bigger. Both had impressively 40-yard dash times of sub 4.5. Neither one had great production at their Big Ten school. Chop Robinson, 4 sacks for the Nittany Lions. Adebawore, 5 sacks for the Wildcats in their last season. And I remember Adebawore being a round 2 guy. Some thought even round 1. He went round 4. I think we may see a similar fall for Chop Robinson. We're sure. He's fast. He's one of the best athletes in this draft class. But if you're a great athlete and you didn't dominate against college football tackles, why are we to believe that something's going to flip in the NFL? I think it's worthy of a solid, round 3 draft pick because of the upside. But for me, I'm not going to spend the 43rd overall pick on a guy who had 4 sacks and was faster than every single tackle he went up against. So I think there's a good chance that he could be available in round 3. And at that point, for value alone, I'll eat my words and say, screw it. Take a guy who ran a sub 4.5 40-yard dash, and maybe he can work out in the NFL better than he did at Penn State. Now, if it's not Chop Robinson, my next preferred candidate, or maybe even more preferred candidate actually, would be Jonah Ellis, the edge rusher out of Utah. 16 tackles for loss, 12 sacks. Here's a guy who had a ton of production, and he wasn't like a 25-year-old edge rusher picking on 19-year-old right tackles. He's 6'2", 248 pounds. He's got a wicked first step, incredible speed and acceleration. Maybe not the strongest guy in this draft class, but in round 3, you're not going to find a perfect edge. He's also the brother of Caden Ellis, so it would be pretty cool just on the Ellis family tree alone to have both of them in Atlanta. And I've got to just envision that their powers will improve and just become Power Rangers if they're on the same team together. Now let's switch gears and look at what Jordan Reed from ESPN had to say on what he's hearing for the Falcons draft. Possible targets in round 1 for the Falcons? Anyone with a pulse that can rush the passer, per an NFC executive. And Atlanta could have its pick of the defensive litter at number 8. Dallas Turner, Laiatu Latu, and Jared Verse are all viewed as options. Jordan and this NFC exec, welcome to the party, because this is what we have been saying for months on this channel and beyond just Falcons Today, this entire fan base. Can you get after the quarterback? You're a Falcon. That's really the entire job description. It's a very short interview process. So when it comes to the top 3 edge rushers, it is definitely up for debate as to who the Falcons should go get. I don't think there is a unanimous decision amongst this fan base, whether it's Turner, Verse, or Latu. Now, what I can offer you is a bit of history. And if you go back to previous drafts, what I did was go back to previous drafts, and I looked at the top 3 pass rushers taken. And there's a pretty good unanimous decision by the NFL when it comes to pass rushers. Whereas wide receivers, you can get varying results of how did that wide receiver go before that wide receiver. What a mistake. Jalen Reagor before Justin Jefferson. The Eagles are idiots. But when it comes to edge rushers, teams know they're edge rushers, and they tend to get it right. You know what I mean? It's still too early to grade the 2023 draft, but Will Anderson definitely looks like the best of the bunch, and that's why he went number 1. Go back a year prior, 2022, you can make a good argument for flip-flopping Aiden Hutchinson and Travon Walker, but even then, it's not like the Jags have a bad player in Walker. He still finished with 10 sacks last year, I think, in Jacksonville. And then Kayvon Thibodeau, I would say, if they did a redraft, he's probably still going 3rd of this bunch here. 2021, not a great edge rusher class. Micah Parsons wasn't even a true outside linebacker, and he was the first guy taken at 12. But if you redid the 2021 draft, I still think it's going in this exact order here. 2022, Chase Young, not living up to the potential, but he's still doing much better than the next 2 guys. 2019, Nick Bosa, Cleveland Farrell, Josh Allen. Like, you could definitely make more than just an argument. This is just wrong here. These two should be flip-flopped. It should go Bosa, Allen, Farrell, probably someone else before Cleveland Farrell even. But the point I'm trying to make here is when the NFL community has a good idea as the order for the top 3 edge rushers, and they go in that order in the draft, it is usually the correct order. The same is not true for quarterbacks, wide receivers, most other position groups. But for one reason or another, they tend to have a pretty good idea as to who the best edge rusher is, and that guy tends to be the best edge rusher. And this year, all eyes are on Dallas Turner. So everyone seems to be in a pretty unanimous decision that he's the number 1 pass rusher, which is why I believe the Falcons, if they're going to go edge at pick number 8, they should go Dallas Turner. Now, I will add one more thing. As we kind of went through all those draft histories, you might have noticed that a lot of those edge rushers went either picks 1, 2, or 3. It is a little bit concerning that, like, no one's giving Dallas Turner even, the time of day to be one of the first 7 picks of the draft, right? Maybe he's a Micah Parsons or like a Parsons in the sense that he fell way too far, but that's just some food for thought. But if you had to pick an edge, who would it be? Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, or Laiatu Latu out of UCLA? Let me know in the comment section below. That will do it for us on this edition of Falcons Today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed our content, reminder to subscribe, like the video, drop a comment, all that good stuff, and I'll see you all later.